The founders of America did not wait till usurped power had strengthened itself in exercise. They detected the abuses in principle, and they prevented the abuses by denying the principle.
So the Constitution, then, is to create a government to safeguard these God-given rights. So in conclusion, this is the foundation of our nation's long history of freedom and liberty. It provides the American people with the ability and the responsibility to shape the future of this great land. If we choose not to take action, we may soon lose our long history of freedom. The choice is ours. Thank you.
By order of the prosecutor, you are hereby detained for offenses against the international community.
When you look at the International Criminal Court, the ICC, I can see just an incredible amount of abuse to use that particular tribunal as a political foil.
The people here who prattle about the rule of law are in the very process of destroying the rule of law and of applying a new standard, which means really rule by the mob.
It would seem that we are then setting up the UN as a world government with direct authority over individuals.
Let's face it, the idea of the court is the idea of establishing a tool of political control over not only people's actions but also people's minds.
They told me nothing except that my name was on a sealed indictment. They flew me out of the country and over to Holland, I think. I was thrown into jail and never given a chance before the trial to meet with an attorney.
The ordeal of John Wills is fiction for now. However, every outrage depicted in our dramatization has been committed by United Nations authorities in the name of international law. In fact, they are standard procedure at UN war crimes tribunals in The Hague and in Africa. And Americans will be subject to such injustices if the UN succeeds in creating a permanent International Criminal Court, or ICC. On July 17, 1998, representatives of 120 nations approved the ICC statute during a UN conference in Rome. UN Secretary General Kofi Annan applauded this development by claiming that, quote, "Now at last we shall have a permanent court to judge those accused of genocide and other comparable crimes wherever and whenever they may be committed," unquote. The key word in this statement is crimes, and it must be understood that the ICC's architects have no intention of limiting that court's jurisdiction to genocide and comparable crimes. Simply put, through the ICC, the UN and its masters would be able to work their sovereign will upon any individual anywhere in the world.
Through this International Criminal Court, and this is really where the rubber hits the road. I mean, you'd have the potential for the UN under this ICC to reach in and rework the social and moral and family and community relations of individual nations.
Dr. Charles Rice of the University of Notre Dame Law School is a widely respected expert on both constitutional and family law.
They could move in and effectively coerce the signatory countries into conforming their social institutions to this design of the United Nations.
This would provide them a blank check to gradually criminalize not only activities as such, but certain political and cultural convictions and values and outlooks.
Dr. Srdja Trifkovic, Executive Director of the Lord Byron Institute, is a former fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution and correspondent for Voice of America.
A legal system of a country is inevitably the function of its cultural heritage and of its political structures. What these people are trying to say is that the world has become such a global village, and we all partake to such an extent in the values of human rights, democracy, and free enterprise, that these particular traditions have become meaningless. And because we are all politically correct celebrants in our mutual diversity, anyone can try anyone else, and we know we'll get a fair trial because we are all touchy-feely about the core values having everything to do with empowerment and all the rest of that rubbish.
Milwaukee attorney Nikola Kostich has volunteered his services as a defense counsel at the UN's War Crimes Tribunal at The Hague.
First of all, you are in effect giving away a part of your national sovereignty. In other words, the jurisdiction of your courts. What you're saying is that for whatever reason, our national courts, our prosecutors cannot handle the case concerning this American citizen, and we're going to turn him over. To me, that's obvious that you're giving up that national sovereignty. The problem is that our courts can do the job. Maybe some other courts in the world cannot, but that's not our problem, that's their problem.
Author and investigative reporter William F. Jasper attended the UN's International Criminal Court Summit in Rome as a correspondent for the New American magazine.
At the Rome Summit, certainly one of the most important and prestigious of the American delegates, unofficial delegates, was William Pace, who was there representing the World Federalist Association. When asked about the possibility of increasing the court's jurisdiction at a later date to include other crimes, said, well, yes, the International Criminal Court is part of a constellation of organizations, and it is the last global institution of this century. He said, we will be able to add other crimes at later dates, environmental crimes, economic crimes, and other crimes concerning drug trafficking. Virtually nothing is outside of the purview, the possibility that these people envision.
Nor would the ICC be limited to prosecuting widely recognized crimes. The UN is even now preparing to criminalize opposition to its social agenda. For example, the UN's Human Rights Commission has ruled that enforced pregnancy, that is, opposition to or denial of abortion, is a crime against world law.
If the right to be protected against enforced pregnancy is an enforceable international human right, well, then what happens to laws that restrict abortion? And if the right of privacy is an enforceable international human right, what happens to laws which restrict marriage to male and female? See, I mean, this is a recipe for a total repeal of the constitutional order that we have, and as well as the Declaration of Independence. And God only knows. Nobody can tell what these things are going to mean. The potential for abuse is virtually unlimited.
The essential is that we have the law of God, it's transcendental, and it is the source of all morality, and then we have the law of nations, and the only jurisprudence that still has legitimacy and legality is the jurisprudence of the nation state.
For many of the players, the important players in the ICC process, the U.S. system, the U.S. constitutional system, is unjust. And I think that we can be assured that the United States will be the target of global campaigns to claim that our justice system, our police system, our prosecution system is unjust, and that the ICC must step in to provide justice.
This whole thing is a monster because if the provision is that the ICC will not exercise jurisdiction if the home state, the home nation, is prosecuting effectively, then they've got to prosecute it, all right? Or presumably bear some kind of burden of proof that they have sufficient reason not to prosecute.
The American courts generally are pretty good. You know, You're going to find exceptions, but across the board, I think that Americans do get speedy trials in federal courts, in state courts.
The ICC is claiming jurisdiction to try Americans for actions committed within the United States which fit their definition of these crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and so on. That is simply a repeal of the Declaration of Independence. I mean, this is outrageous.
This, of course, represents the fastening of an alien body of jurisprudence claiming or usurping the title of the rule of law over American constitutional law, over our American constitutional system.
You just can't sustain this thing on any basis other than what you're doing is simply canceling the 4th of July.
I had no right to confront my accusers, no right to subpoena witnesses, and no right to cross-examine the evidence presented against me. But the prosecution, they were allowed to use hearsay testimony and wild speculations from witnesses I've never seen before. And the court demanded that I give self-incriminating testimony. I refused. I was told that my refusal would be used as evidence against me.
If you compare the American Bill of Rights, which is really what we're talking about, where we're talking about U.S. citizens potentially being under the jurisdiction of this international tribunal, no, they would not enjoy anything close to what we enjoy here in the United States. Very quickly, they would not have a right to have a jury trial. They would be tried by some type of a judge panel, judges who are citizens of other countries, whose reputation may or may not be known, who may or may not be experienced.
What is particularly worrying is that in the case of The Hague, we have both the methods and the means that would be considered totally unacceptable by any civilized country's standards in domestic jurisprudence. It would be unimaginable, for instance, in Britain or the United States or France today, to have a secret list of indictees and to have people literally kidnapped at gunpoint and some of them killed in the process because an attempt is made to arrest them even without the warrant being made public.
And it's not unusual for people to sit a year, 2 years, 3 years before they're brought before the court.
Unfortunately, all of the problems and the travesties that we saw associated, and we continue to see associated with the Yugoslav War Tribunal, are going to be replicated in the International Criminal Court.
Certainly the American public, if at some point the ICC becomes a topic of conversation at town hall meetings and or some congressional meetings and conferences, I think when they hear about the lack of a speedy trial and the fact that you can misuse bail and investigative reasons for detaining people, I don't think that the people are going to be happy to be a part of a system of that nature.
Indicted Americans would either be tried by U.S. courts acting under UN orders or surrender to be tried before the ICC.
Why isn't that just like extradition? Well, you're not extraditing the person to that foreign country. What you're doing is turning him over to a UN tribunal for that trial. And then the issue that I think has to be considered is what are you turning him over to? And you're turning him over to a tribunal where he does not have the procedural protections of the Bill of Rights and where he is going into a tribunal which is its own prosecutor, court, jury, and appeal body. I mean, it's a procedure that is wholly foreign to the American judicial system.
According to the ABA's top leadership, as represented by Jerome Shestack, the Bill of Rights can go out the window. Far from promoting the ideals of justice as demonstrated in the American system, our constitutional system, the whole process in Rome at the ICC conference was stridently anti-American, blatantly anti-American. There were demonstrations daily outside, staged demonstration outside the conference center by the Transnational Radical Party and other non-governmental organizations, NGOs, that were there in plentiful number.
Who are going to be the judges, and under what criteria are they going to operate? The whole concept of law is that law in our system is that law is supposed to be a rule of reason which in a sense controls the state, and the state should operate under law. I mean, there's simply no reasonable expectation that that will be the case under this operation.
I sat in the media center, or in the galleries, or out in the audience of the Committee of the Whole, and whenever a country like Canada or Norway or one of the third world countries would attack the United States, the NGOs would go wild with glee, and much of the media as well, including much of the American media. Whenever a stridently anti-American statement was made, or when a U.S. position was denounced or opposed, you'd see these folks going, yes, yes, take that, United States, take that, America.
You've got judges who come from the African area who know a little bit about common law, but then they've also have layers of law that may be tribal law, customary law in their countries. You have judges from the Muslim countries, and they, of course, apply or think about what the Quran says and some of those laws. And then not to mention Red China, which is a huge population. They've got a judge, and that judge, of course, has layers of socialist, communist law, not to mention other layers that are underpinning that, and so on and so forth. And I think that's a problem. And the reason it's a problem, I think, is that Americans, who might end up being subjects of some kind of a prosecution, have an idea of fairness. The American idea of fairness, which, by the way, I agree with because I've practiced here for 28 years, is the fact that you have rules that are specified in our laws. You have state statutes, you have federal statutes. They're published, they're written, they're available for the public. We have education on what's right and what's wrong in schools, universities. And you are asking to be notified what law are you violating. And the problem is we're finding that at the ICTY, as well as I think if the ICC comes into creation, we're going to find people saying, well, I never thought that this was a violation of the law.
Clearly the target of most of the advocates and activists there was the United States. It seems the United States is the most vicious perpetrator of all of these crimes that they believe should be adjudicated by this new world body.
During the trial, I was surrounded by heavily armed guards and kept in an isolation booth for, quote, security reasons. The chief prosecutor was from China, the presiding judge from Cuba, and my court-appointed attorney was from Bulgaria. They all made it pretty clear from the beginning that the trial was just a formality, and I was already presumed guilty.
The ICC's architects and some of its most ardent supporters include officials from some of the world's most notorious despotisms, such as communist Cuba.
I find it rather amusing that in The Hague, for instance, you have judges from, say, Nigeria, where they hang poets who are to the dislike of the military government, from Pakistan, and from China, where we had the experience of Tiananmen, and so on and so on. To pretend that in countries that do not share the Euro-Christian tradition of jurisprudence, you can get a fair trial is simply preposterous.
We are used to seeing some of the worst tyrants and the worst dictators and totalitarians and communist perpetrators of atrocities throughout the world pontificating about human rights and justice and peace and whatnot. In spite of all of the pious pronouncements and platitudes about ending war crimes and crimes against humanity and ending the impunity of tyrants. It is very clear that the end game and the agenda of those who are pushing this is the establishment of a global judiciary with global power that will be unrestrained by the nation state.
These sort of international elites, international civil servants, have these ideas and these thoughts that are very grandiose. I think many of them want to do social engineering.
The organizing and driving force behind this whole movement has been private organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations and the Royal Institute for International Affairs, who have throughout this century been the chief proponents for and catalysts for and organizing for driving forces for the whole internationalist movement and the creation of global governance or world government.
And the proposed criminal court would only be a form of totalitarianism, or rather a tool of that totalitarianism that will have a velvet glove instead of a steel one. What I fear is that there would be a gradual process of salami slicing, where the eventual subjugation of the citizen of the United States or Britain or France to a body that is essentially a voluntaristic, quasi-judicial political body controlled by the political elites would be like putting a frog into the cold water and then gradually increasing the heat. If you put it into the boiling water, it will jump out right away.
If we look at Rwanda and Bosnia, and now in Kosovo and Sierra Leone, the horrendous human rights violations that are taking place, it is not difficult to imagine that a heightened sense of urgency could be contrived by repetitive showing of these terrible atrocities by a sympathetic United States media to stampede the Congress, and particularly the Senate, into believing that there is a global moral imperative that unless we stand with those proposing the International Criminal Court, that we are standing with the tyrants and by the genocide perpetrators. The history of previous UN treaties in the Senate and the way in which they have been very abruptly resurrected, the Genocide Treaty, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, other United Nations conventions on civil and political rights and women's rights, the Law of the Sea Treaty, all of these have been declared dead at various times and then resurrected. The advocates of a criminal court have made it very plain that they see this as a long-term battle. It may take them several years, it may take them a decade, but they've made it very plain that they intend to see the United States eventually sign on to it.
My trial was made available to the media around the world as a way to intimidate those who might oppose the United Nations agenda. I realize now the whole exercise had nothing to do with justice, but everything to do with power.
The only purpose to be served by American approval of the ICC treaty would be to make Americans subject to that court's jurisdiction. America is the target of the ICC, and you are the bullseye. The preservation of our individual liberties and of our system of law requires, at the very least, that the Senate reject the ICC treaty entirely and in perpetuity. However, the only lasting solution will be to get the United States out of the United Nations and to banish the UN from our shores.
For more information on the ICC or to find out how you can help stop the ICC, call the John Birch Society at 1-800-JBS-USA1 today.